Today we are going to discuss about the topic which is analyzing stakeholders' power in public policy. The aim of analyzing stakeholders' power is to know the likelihood the stakeholders have for them to either support the policy implementation or even oppose the policy implementation. So in order to analyze their power they have in the public policy, we need first of all to know the stakeholders, and then we'll make a kind of analysis to know the likelihood that they will support or oppose the policy. Here we have an example of the proposal, which is to construct the female accommodation. And this female accommodation will be constructed in a ward secondary school. So the aim here is to make analysis so that we can make an establishment of the possibilities for the stakeholders to have support or the likelihood that the stakeholders will oppose this kind of proposal. And then in the end we can establish the importance in implementing this proposal, in which in the end it will help in making sure that we will have a constructive tactics to make all stakeholders to have support of our proposal so that it can be implemented. So the main objective here is to analyze the extent of power difference between different stakeholders who can either support our policy or oppose our policy. And the policy which we are having here today is the construction of female accommodation. So, in order to make this analysis, there are some steps which we need to follow. And the first step is to make a 4-quadrant or to construct a quadrant. And this quadrant, we have separate 4 quadrants. The first one is for weaker supporters. That means among the stakeholders which we are having, there are stakeholders who will support our proposal, but the power which they are having is weak. They are not strong. And on the opposite side, we have the strong supporters. This means the stakeholders who have the higher likelihood of supporting our proposal. And the third quadrant is weak opponent. The weak opponent, these are the stakeholders who are likely to oppose our proposal. But for this case, the weak opponent have low or have weak likelihood that they can oppose our proposal. For this kind of stakeholders, we can deal with them in order to make them support our proposal, to get their support in implementing our proposal. And the fourth quadrant is a strong opponent. These are the opponents who have high power in opposing our proposal. So that in order to make our proposal implemented, that means we need to make this kind of stakeholders to have support or to support our implementation, so that in the end the proposal will be implemented successful. So the aim of making all this analysis is to make sure that in the end we'll move the stakeholders who are weak supporters or weak opponent, as well as the stakeholders who are strong opponents, will all move them to be the strong supporters, and which in the end it will help us to implement our project successful. This is the steps which we are, the first step, which is very important, that is to construct a quadrant with the 4 separate quadrant in order to make analysis of our stakeholders to know where do they belong. So the second step is mapping, is to place now the stakeholders' name in the quadrant, as I have explained here, that we have weak supporters, weak opponent, strong opponent, and the strong supporters. So the second step on making analysis of their power, first of all, is to identify them. The second one is to place their names in the particular quadrant or in the appropriate stakeholders. That is, after identifying a particular stakeholder, having some kind of discussion to know whether this stakeholder will be a weaker support or will it be a stronger support. Then the step now is to place the name in the appropriate quadrant. So after doing this process, another stage is to discuss the results. This is to make sure that we are having all stakeholders together, and then we are making some kind of discussion after placing their name in the appropriate quadrant. We are now making some kind of discussion to see the extent of power they have, each particular have, in implementing this particular proposal. So we'll make a kind of discussion in order to have different ways, or to come up with different ways now which will help to move the stakeholders who are either weaker opponent or weaker support, to move all of them to be the stronger supporter in implementing our project. So these are the steps which we are trying to discuss here. And now, after having this video, we'll have a class activity. This is the assignment which will be discussed in the class. So the student will be required to prepare a flip chart and to draw the 4 quadrant for analyzing the stakeholder for our particular policy, which is now constructing the female accommodation in a ward secondary school. So the student will prepare a 4 quadrant in order to analyze the stakeholders who are likely to be supporters or who are likely to be the opponent in implementing this project. So after identifying the stakeholders, then we will brainstorm. The student will brainstorm together with the support from the facilitator to know the power of each stakeholder and the likelihood for them to support or oppose the proposal. And then we will place each stakeholder in the respective quadrant based on the analysis. That is, we'll place the stakeholders. Let's say some stakeholders will appear to be weak supporters. We'll place them in the quadrant which is for the weak supporters. And this will be done to all 4 quadrants. And in the end, the students, together with the facilitator, will discuss and propose strategies on how now to deal with each of these stakeholders to make sure or to ensure that they will be the strong supporters, or we will get their support during the implementation. So this is the class activity which will be done in our session. Thank you very much.